there's always been conversations about, the younger generation. But I think as a Gen Z,
yes.
and also hearing what people say about Gen Z, and also just working in a company where I am literally the only Gen Z employee.
Yeah. Welcome to WITT. Hi, I'm Megan. I talk with founders, investors, and operators working in tech. My aim is to inspire you with their stories and perspectives. Through this podcast, I want to amplify the voice of women working in tech. If you want to support WITT, then make sure you follow us on your favourite podcasting app. Then you won't miss any future episodes. Today we're joined by Isabella, a filmmaker, videographer and marketing professional passionate about visual storytelling. She brings a global lens to her work, exploring nostalgia, the climate crisis and feminism. Let's dive in. Hi Isabella, welcome to WITT. It's great to have you on the podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. I would love to kick off our conversation with a lightning round. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. First question. What is your favourite Finnish word or phrase?
I think it's gotta be noni. It's just such a fun word.
It is such a fun word, definitely. Great choice. Second question. What is your favourite place that you've lived and why?
I think it has to be Finland. There's just so many benefits here, and there's so many good things here in Finland that I love living here. But a very, very close second is Halifax, Nova Scotia, which holds a very special place in my heart.
Lovely. An easy one, coffee or tea?
Tea. Definitely tea. Can't
tea
do
all
coffee.
The way. Fourth question. If you could collaborate with any filmmaker, who would it be?
That's such a difficult question. There's just too many for me to pick from that I can't pick just one. There's just too many people from the greats, the big ones in Hollywood, but then also so many of my friends and connections around the world that I would love to work with. So I can't pick just one. So that will be my answer there.
Yeah. Favorite social media platform for sharing your work?
I think that's got to be YouTube. My work is video based, and just being able to share, I've basically all of my video work has been shared on YouTube throughout the very long time that I've been making videos, from, the start of my video making career, if you'll say, to my most recent documentary that I produced. So I think YouTube has to be there. But then for the community aspect, I would say it has to be LinkedIn. From being able to, connect with so many people from my different, kind of career paths, or from my different aspects, from whether it's marketing or fashion or video making, filmmaking, and now even the rotor industry and everything in between. LinkedIn is just such a great platform, being able to connect with all of those different communities for me.
Yeah, it definitely is one of the best communities. Next question. Your dream location for filming a project?
Oh, it would have to depend on what the project is. Everything is based on context. But I loved, we were there only for about 2 days, if even that, but filming in northern Norway for the helicopter documentary, that was just absolutely gorgeous. And we had 3 hours to go explore actually some of the mountains, a little
only
bit.
3 hours, really?
Basically, we were it was a very much quick trip up there, and we were mainly on the base to film with our pilot Andreas, but it was so gorgeous, even just to visit again, not to even do a production there, but there's just so many locations that I would love to do a project at. But obviously it also depends on what that project would be, so there's too many to pick from.
Yeah, I love Norway. It's definitely on my bucket list. What would you say is the biggest challenge for you as a creator?
That's a tricky one, because there's just every project has had its challenges, but I think for me as a creative, most recently, it's been about kind of creating space to create. I made, 2 years ago, we were making the documentary film, and then we released it last year. But now I've been very much in the marketing part of a film. So like really pushing it out, marketing the film, sharing it everywhere, you know, for the past few months. And I haven't been necessarily creating as much. You know, I started making YouTube videos when I was like 12 years old. And I was like, for almost throughout middle and high school, I was making a video almost every week. And then in university, I kind of slowed down, but then I was starting to make more short films and working on different kind of marketing video projects here and there with different, you know, companies and startups and brands. So I think recently the challenge has been making the time to create those projects that are kind of more from my heart, or kind of like I have a lot of ideas that I want to do, but kind of creating the space to make those ideas become a reality, I think is the kind of a challenge. No, I don't like how I phrased it, but you know, I'm just doing different projects right now that require a different type of creativity that, you know, and kind of learning how to put my creative skills in different formats, I guess.
Have a bit more of a balance. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, next question. What is your go-to strategy for staying productive and focused?
For me, that has definitely been like, trying to be very organized and scheduling and project planning. I am known to be kind of a very organized, color-coded spreadsheet type of gal. Like, just with any project that I do, especially when I'm working with like any other people, like if I'm working on a larger project, there will always be a spreadsheet that is in like multiple colors and has different meanings and kind of everything is
color coded.
Yeah. But like, and this is something that I've been learning, but when it's just me who's in charge, or like it's just me solely responsible, is that I've had to kind of get better about making that organization for myself. So just, planning out, for these 2 hours, I'm going to do X, and then I'm going to move on to this. And it's like scheduling and blocking that time off, I found has been the most effective for me. That on production, I could be a multitasker, but when I'm, you know, working at the desk, I am very much of like, I need to block time off. I can't be multitasking. So that's, I think, the most effective for me, is that, you know, really diving into the project plan and really detailing it and kind of what the different parts that needs to be done, and then scheduling that time in.
Yeah, it's different for everyone, so it makes sense. And then what would be the most valuable lesson you've learned from failure?
I think it's learning from the mistake, or learning from the failure necessarily, and then learning to pivot from that failure. Is, I think, you know, when something goes wrong, you kind of need to recognize what happened and be like, okay, this is not going to happen again, and this is how I'm not going to make sure that it doesn't, and this is what we're going to do instead, you know. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then do you have any life mottos you strive by?
It's kind of just like more of an attitude, is that I'm just going to make it happen, you know. Whatever it is, like, I'm just, you know, however it's going to work, I'm going to make it happen, you know, and figuring out, you know, how, if I want to, you know, make films, how am I going to make a film? Or if, you know, if I want to work with someone, how am I going to work with them? Or, you know, really have to like push myself to be able to do that. But yeah.
Awesome. And then a fun one. What is your go-to GIF?
My go-to GIF. Lord, I mean, I love GIFs, but I'm trying to think if I have like a go-to. I don't know if I have a go-to. It kind of like depends on the mood. Like I like to very much curate my GIFs of like, okay, like this is the exact, like finding like one that exactly represents the moment. But if there was one that I use quite often, is when I'm on my period and I will send a GIF to my partner of like, my uterus is dying, from New Girl, from Jess saying my baby box is trying to kill me. That would probably be my most used gift of every month. That is the one that's used. Because I like to curate for different things, so there's not like a go-to for me.
That's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, you use them to express different emotions. You have to find the exact right one. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then a less fun one, but what are the numbers of times you've been mansplained to this week?
This week?
Yeah, just this week.
Just this week. Trying to think. Not too much.
That's good.
Not too much. Thankfully, not too much. I think only a couple times, Thankfully,
that's good.
I don't, have to interact with too many men who feel the need to mansplain what I do.
That's good.
That's usually helpful. So,
awesome.
But I also try not to surround myself with, men who would. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay, and then who is the most talented young person you know?
Honestly, my younger siblings. Both of them, are so cool and amazing. My younger sister Gabby, they are in their master's degree right now and living in Copenhagen, and they are doing all types of research and projects, and they are now going on. They've been kind of doing these EU culture projects, and they're going to be going to these youth seminar things around the world, and they're just a really cool person. And then my younger brother is just an amazing photographer who's just he was just also at Copenhagen Fashion Week and taking these amazing photos for different brands, and he is just such a hardworking guy and just so I honestly awesome. My younger siblings they're so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they are cool, very cool. And then, what's next on your creative bucket list? And that can be just projects or whatever.
Yeah, damn. Well, next project that I'm doing is a short film that I'm producing for a friend. But on the bucket list, I eventually want to revisit my documentary about women filmmakers, and because that was made during COVID. It was my thesis project for my bachelor's degree, so it's not it was all basically over Zoom type of interviews and me talking to the camera about the history. So I think that would be a project that I want to revisit and kind of produce it at a much higher quality. But that's I know also a project that is farther down the line, I think, in my career that I want to do.
Okay. Awesome. And then last question for the lightning round is, if you had to describe your kind of journey in 3 emojis, what would they be?
Lord. Well, I think the video camera has to obviously be one.
Of course.
Obviously. Probably the airplane, because I've moved around and traveled so much.
Traveling, yeah.
What would be a good third one? The people, or even the family emoji, because I think our family unit is so tight knit that I think that would and because I work so much with my family in different ways and for different things, so I think those 3 would be would be it. Yeah,
I think they're good ones for you. Yeah, definitely. Well, that was great. Thank you so much for answering my lightning round questions. Let's move on now to your journey, right? So you've lived in 5 countries, I believe. And you're so far beating me by 1. I will catch up. It's not a competition, but it is. Anyways, so tell me about how that journey kind of shaped you. So moving from different countries.
Yeah, so just for a bit of context for your listeners, I was born in Finland, in Turku. But at the time, my parents were living in Germany. And I lived in Germany for about just before I turned 2, when we moved to the US. And there I basically spent nearly a decade living in the US, but moving on average every 2 years to a different state. So I've lived in New York, Ohio, Tennessee, Colorado, Virginia. So a bit of all over there before I moved to Sweden for 3 years, went back to the US for a year and a half, moved to Canada before moving to Finland in 2017. So I think growing up, moving around so much, it just created such a close-knit family for us, like,
Mm-hmm.
and also kind of created like the necessity to create my own thing, in terms of that's kind of what got me started in creating videos.
Okay.
Because I had just moved to Sweden, and I was kind of like, and at that point when we were living in Sweden, we were doing quite a bit of travel around Europe, like visiting different countries, because for us kids, it was kind of more of like the first time, quote unquote. Like, obviously I was born in Finland and everything, but I obviously don't remember those first 2 years of my life.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like this quote unquote first time in Europe. So we were traveling quite a bit. So I was creating these videos just about our life in Sweden, but then also about our travels and kind of like this lifestyle-ish content, vlogs and stuff, when we were living there. And I think it was a lot, and that's also very similar with my younger siblings, of them kind of developing their own artistic practices with different mediums, was that, we kind of had to find something that we could do anywhere and on our own. Like, it was very difficult to kind of think in the ideas of joining like a sports team or doing like, or joining a club, because like, those are kind of, especially as younger children, like, it was a lot easier to move around. But towards like, by the time I was like at the end of middle school and then started high school, when we moved back to the US from Sweden, it was a lot harder, because that's a lot more kind of a instrumental part of your development. I feel like your high school years, your teenagehood and then early adulthood. So I ended up going to high school in 3 different countries. So it's
nice.
like, I do not recommend, doing that. But I found people everywhere I went, that are still close friends, to this day from those years. But I think it was also really instrumental for me to have been doing also the video at that time, and creating videos, and then eventually kind of going into then doing some videos for my mom and her work, and then doing some videos here and there that were a little bit different than like these lifestyle vlogs that I was making. And then when we moved to Finland, and kind of that whole, I found that like it was really nice to move back to Europe, especially Finland, especially having lived in Sweden during kind of what was basically middle school for me, because I was then in Sweden having there was a lot more freedom for me that was kind of allowed, because I wasn't like a small child, but like but there's a lot more freedom and like safety there for me to have that freedom, which I had never had growing up in the US. So I basically spent like the first 12 years of my life basically in that mindset of living in the US, which I think has shaped me in a way that kind of being prepared for different situations, and like a lot of my, I would say, mannerisms. But I think then living in Sweden and also Canada and Finland have really shaped me in the understanding of like my values and what I treasure in what, both in my career, but then also in my personal life, of what I want to have, in all of those aspects of my life. So I think, having those different understandings and the experiences from different cultures and different countries, and like just different types of people in different places. And, even through our travels, like we saw a lot of culture, whether it was through art and history and just, or architecture, just like all types of different things that I think really influenced myself and I would say also my younger siblings. I think we've talked a lot about this, that, our childhood is very different, but I think really shaped who we are and kind of gave us a lot larger of a world view.
Yeah, no, I mean, I obviously have similar experiences traveling around the world, living in loads of different cultures and countries. And it definitely does, change definitely impacts your views and your kind of opinions, which is a good thing.
I think it's really important that we have those different viewpoints and understandings, and it just helps us grow as people.
Definitely. And so now you're in Finland, as we said before.
Yes.
And you were also born here, so you were born in 2000s.
Yeah.
And so you're turning 25, I believe, this month.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, scary.
Put it out there, God. Yeah, so I'll be turning 25.
Well, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
So, yeah. And then I think we've talked about this before, but we talked about how Gen Z can kind of strive in the workplace, right? And I wanted to ask your opinion and get a better understanding of what you think we should do to support kind of younger people at work.
Yeah, I think I think there's a lot of talk about Gen Z in the workplace, I feel like. And obviously with every generation, there has always been, the younger generation has always been the difficult generation. I mean, if we look back at what people were saying about millennials, or then what they were saying about Gen X, there's always been conversations about, the younger generation. But I think as a Gen Z, and also hearing what people say about Gen Z, and also just working in a company where I am literally the only Gen Z employee.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think it can be kind of challenging, because I think
definitely
our generation has different expectations, especially, with, how the different world things that happened during our childhood, but then also COVID happening kind of like at that cusp of like, whether you're just getting out of high school or just getting out of university, like I was.
Yeah, penultimate time.
During that, COVID really, I mean, obviously COVID is still like a impactful thing still today, but like during those peak years, I think it kind of shifted a lot of things for that.
Definitely.
And just like everything that was happening around the time, that our values matter so much to our generation. In terms of that, I think it's really important to recognize that, we're not going to take any bullshit. And it's really difficult to also realize that older generations sometimes might be more willing to accept the bullshit. Sometimes, in a company.
Yeah, definitely.
Or have different values or expectations. I think it's also how companies can support Gen Z is understanding that, our experiences are very different.
Yeah.
In terms of that, I've literally been told that you're too young to have any experience on this. And I'm like, but also a man, but dude, but actually I do. It's just not like a job placement or or like a university degree in that specific thing. But I actually do have a lot of experience in this. It's just different from how you see experience. I think especially because with my background of having so many different things have happened throughout just my life, like personally, that I've done or seen or been able to, that feeds so much into how I work and what I do in so many different ways, that I feel like it's very much like, sometimes I have to explain that, hey, just because I don't have XYZ on my CV at XYZ company doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing. And actually I can do it a whole lot better, sometimes. But so I think the understanding that Gen Z really, we're not a lazy generation, that, we want to do the work, we want to work, but we're not going to take bullshit, and we want to do it how we have experienced life. Yeah, so, but basically I think, the support that Gen Z requires, but with anyone really, is just that there has to be kind of the acceptance of different expectations or different experiences, and there also has to be the kind of environment in which older generations will listen to their younger employees and their suggestions, and kind of also take into account different perspectives. It's very similar to if you have two people from two different cultures that have different understandings of something, that you should listen to the person from a different culture. So that's also similar. So you should also consider listening to the viewpoints of someone from a different generation. I think our generation has a lot of, I think very much the living on the internet we have how we have just grown up online, basically how having grown up online and the applications of that give us so many different abilities that I don't think are even necessarily fully being realized today. Like, I think, over as the years go on and the rest of our generation kind of enters the workforce and begins taking on higher positions in, in companies, that I think that realization of what our skills and how our skills can be applied will change as well. And I think that's what our generation is really trying to do, is to push that, hey, we can do different things, or we can do this and that, and it might not look exactly like what you did 20 years ago, but also the world isn't the same as 20 years ago. So
yeah, exactly. It's a different world. I would definitely say that Gen Z is a very kind of penultimate generation, because we're very different from our kind of parents or the previous generation. We kind of, as you said, lived on and grew up with the internet kind of just there. So it's definitely about different understanding, different, you could say, culture. But yeah, definitely, I understand what you're trying to say. And then I think we'll switch gears a little bit, because I think we've talked a lot about that. And we'll talk a little bit more about your kind of themes for your films. So I know that a few of your themes are like, environmental issues and exploring that. And then how do you see the role of a creator like yourself in kind of driving social sustainability and justice and responsibility?
Yeah, so creatively, I've tried to focus on different things. So, for example, some of my photo projects have been more about environmentalism. I still have yet to make a film on that topic. But for me, especially with documentaries, and I want to make films that kind of focus on a topic that necessarily isn't always on stories that aren't necessarily told, or things that I feel are valuable.
Yeah, makes sense.
So kind of for me, obviously a big part of what my values are is social sustainability, in terms of focusing on both intersectional environmentalism, but also like intersectional feminism, and kind of understanding that everything is connected, and all that drives a lot of my values in my work, but then also in my personal life, of actively trying not to buy, like, I do not buy fast fashion, and like I try to buy only secondhand or from sustainable brands only. So like just as an example, so for my work, a lot of my kind of social sustainable work has been either through my films, or then now the work that I do at Crush with my mother, for our the Crush event and Crush movement that we have in focusing on kind of closing the gap of the gender parity in terms of pay and leadership, and kind of really changing how leadership is done. It's been also about kind of learning. So learning about something and just wanting to like share that and highlight it, of like, hey, this is kind of a problem, or like this is something that I want to focus on. So for example, like during COVID, and especially during the mass climate strikes that were happening in that year, and in 2020 and 2021, I made a photo series that basically highlighted Gen Z and the climate crisis, of how that usually our generation is so focused on the climate crisis and very vocal about it, but that because we are of a younger generation, our voices are also then not heard, or then seen as not valuable, because we are not
don't have the experience.
Don't have the experience. We're not as not as valued voices, on this topic.
Even though we are
very much we are the future, and we are very much like, if our generation doesn't, then we are like the last generation to be able to make like an impact, truly, like we like.
Definitely.
But then also like, highlighting industries in which women are underrepresented. So like in my first documentary film, Women in Film, I wanted to share both the history of women, because women actually held, before the 1920s, had a much higher percentage of roles behind the camera, which we still have not returned to, and we're in 2025, and like women represent like less than 20% of the film industry behind the camera.
As is for most industries. Yes.
As is for most industries. Like in the helicopter industry, I think pilots make up less than like 5% of pilots. I think it's even like more closer to around 2%. So it's like
crazy.
It's absolutely insane. So for me, I just want to
bring attention to those issues.
I want to bring attention to different issues through my work, whether it's a documentary film or it's a photo project. So of kind of just highlighting those different ideas, and I'm still trying to figure out how I want to highlight those. So that's also why like it's learning by doing. Like maybe if we revisit the asking what my motto is for life, it's learning by doing has been a very big one of that. I am self-taught in everything that I've done, everything that I do, you know, especially when it comes to my creative work. That like so for me, it's kind of learning how I want to present different issues or highlight different topics, or bring attention to different things through work is also a learning process. Okay, what is the best medium? What is the best presentation of this? So.
Yeah, definitely. Talking about your kind of projects and your films, can you walk us through your kind of creative process on like how you make these films, documentaries, short films?
So obviously every project is a little bit different.
Of course.
But for example, usually how my documentaries have started is that it's an idea that like, hey, this is kind of like an interesting topic that not many people know about. Let me do some research. Especially with my first film, I did so much research. Granted, it was also my bachelor's thesis. But and then it's okay, who can I talk to about this? Like, as I want to always show people and share their stories. So in my documentaries, so it's okay, who can I talk to about this? Who can I show? And it's finding those people and talking to them about it, and then filming it and editing it and everything. But then like short films, my short film discography has primarily been films that I've produced. So they're not necessarily my stories. And the short films I kind of refer to are more of like fiction. They're fictional short films that others have written that I've produced. So those are slightly different processes in terms of that I've been brought on as a producer, or I've chosen to be the producer and whatnot. And it's okay, we have the story. This is how the different ways that we need to film it, and how are we going to do that, and organizing a team and being that kind of project manager and kind of just coordinating with the different aspects of our team, whether it's filming or the audio or lighting or everything. So, and then it's also then very different from then kind of these more the video work that I've done, I guess you could say. So kind of where I've worked with a brand or a company to create video content for them. Usually then it's like has been like myself, maybe an additional team member, usually has been my younger brother or then a freelancer friend, working on a project together where it's just the two of us shooting this video content with the companies, either usually their own marketing person or someone stepping in that kind of producer role. And those have been more like, okay, it's how do we want to, depends on that client's needs of how do we want to share that story, or what are we focusing on? Is it a specific product, or is it someone's story within the company, or or is it just like a brand video, or is it like a campaign video? So it's kind of, there's different processes, but they usually are about the same of working, okay, how are we going to capture it? Where do we capture it? When do we capture it? And then doing all of the editing.
Yeah.
So.
Very interesting. I like it. It's good to kind of get behind the brain of the film. But now we've entered the part of the podcast which I like to call the zigzag zone. Woo! And so I basically want to know where you're zagging and where everyone else is zigging.
I think, I don't know if there's a specific like a specific topic, but I think where I have usually zigged from is maybe the film industry in particular. I have been very vocal about this with people that I feel that the film industry in Finland is very... But I find that the film industry in Finland is just... There is one path to go, and if you don't follow that path, it's very difficult to enter it in a traditional sense. I think that also is because the film industry in Finland is so reliant on funding from governmental grants, your like European Union grants, etc. Whereas I have always been of the mindset of, you know, I'm just going to do it however I want, and has also been very much aligned with, I think, because it comes from maybe my marketing background, or also because of my American background, of that, like, for reference, in the US, usually films are made through a production company that's fronting the costs and then sells it to, for example, someone to distribute it, like Netflix, for example. Like, there are many paths in that way. That's just one very... but, so I feel like in Finland, that understanding that a corporation or a brand could sponsor a film is slightly still unknown. So for me, I think that's where I've decided to kind of zigged, as you could say, is that I've chosen to just go my own way when it comes to filmmaking. If I overlap within the Finnish film industry, I would, that would be great. But I think there also has to be an understanding that there are different perspectives that can provide an insight within the film industry, or really any industry. Like, it's so important to have those different perspectives and have different backgrounds to be able to have new ideas. So I think, for me, that's kind of, I'm just going to do it how I can do it to be able to make the films or whatever, whatever I want to do.
You just do your own thing and
just do
let
your own
other
thing.
people,
so I think, which
chill.
can be also really challenging in a way.
Yeah.
Because then you're kind of further dividing yourself from the norm or the traditional way of going about it. But I think with any industry, and especially as women, we are continuously told and pushed that, like, hey, to make it in this industry, or to make it, or be a leader, you have to act like a man, to get, like, investments, or do this or that, and just, like, be strong, and it's like, no, you don't have
I'm
to
just
be
gonna
like
do it my own way. Thank you very much.
Let's, like, change that mindset that we have to be more like men to be able to succeed, because some men aren't really that successful, actually. If we look at today's current, world, men aren't really doing great. Some men are. I know but I think that we need to lean towards more of, like, finding our own way, and I say "our" in the terms of we as women, and have to understand that, maybe there's a different way to be leaders. Maybe we just have to be rebels and find our own way. We have to rebel together and find our own way of being those leaders or change makers, or zigging in a different way to do what we want.
Definitely.
And in terms of our finding just new ways of doing things. So for me, I think there isn't necessarily, like, one topic or one, like, subject that I'm zigging from others, but I think it's more of, like, an attitude change.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, well, that was great. Now we're at story time. Yay. And I want to know about a certain famous mouse and your first modeling job. So how did that happen?
Yeah, so this would have been, like, 2009-ish, was kind of my first professional modeling gig. For reference, I had already been modeling prior for my mother's online company Skimco when we were living in Colorado, but this was like the first like big brand. We were modeling, me and my siblings were modeling for the Hanes catalog, which is like in of itself crazy. But we were doing so on a Disney cruise to the Caribbean with Mickey Mouse. So that was just like, it was like a very weird experience because it was like it's like we are like small children. Like I think at that point like 9 or 10, and then I think my brother was like just barely in kindergarten at that point.
Okay, so it's like very young. Okay.
Very young. And it's like we're working with these like adult models as well who are like pretending to be our parents in the photos. So it was like a very weird concept as well.
Yeah.
But it was like really fun as well because it was like we're just like doing these cool things. Like we were making like slime in the kids lab on the cruise, or like, you know, walking on the sandy beach, you know, just like, you know, showing off these clothes basically. It was like a very weird experience to be kind of like working as a kid and like kind of in a very professional setting. It was just like a really interesting experience that like, you know, like you don't ever think about like, oh yeah, that some child is modeling these clothing in this like ad. Obviously they did some work. So it's like, it was just like a very weird experience. I mean, we still like, obviously my mom like saved like multiple of the catalogs, so we have like some in like our various storage places of that, to like sometimes just pull them out. It's like, wow, this is like really interesting, you know, because it's like a catalog, so there's just like some of the pages are just like tons of pictures of like just different t-shirts in different colors, and that's it. And then there's just like, oh, there's a page of my, you know, younger sister on the shoulders of this male model and looking at Mickey Mouse. Like that's, you know, that was like the vibe. So it was just, like, very weird.
that must have been a bit of a weird experience, but you still got to hang out with Mickey Mouse, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really nice. We're very much a Disney family. So
okay, that definitely helped then.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that sounds awesome. And sadly, we're coming to the end of our podcast episode. But I do have 3 final questions for you. So the first one being, imagine it's 2035.
Okay.
Where are you in your life? Where are you in your journey?
Okay, so at that point I'll be 35. That, you know, really putting out my age there today.
Sorry.
It's okay. I would say that I would hope that I am in, if not full-time, but a more, in terms of, I have done more documentary films. That is, I think, the direction that I'm very much...
The goal, right?
One of the goals, I would say. I'm at a very, like, I feel like I'm, like, all the time, like, I'm very much of, like, what do I want to do? But I'm also, like, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want type of mentality. Or not, like, obviously not really, but, like, meaning that, like, I feel like I have so many skills in different aspects that, like, that I like to do, that I'm like, I don't know what exactly my career is going to look like.
Of course
not. I obviously no one really does. So I think for me it's kind of finding what that balance is. But I think for me in 10 years I would have hoped, my goal is to make more documentary films. And kind of see what that journey is. But I also know that the film industry is a very difficult industry to kind of sustain oneself on that alone, which is also why I know that I won't be drifting too far away from marketing, and I think that I will still be working in some aspect in that. How I will be doing that, I don't know. We'll see how the next 10 years go. Who knows what could be happening then?
This is a very good point. Who knows?
Who knows? Just kind of like, I have pivoted many times already in my career. You know, I've been basically working already for 10 years, but making videos for nearly 20 years. So like I think, I've not unfamiliar to the pivot. And finding
definitely.
new ways of doing things.
And next question, which is, how can listeners follow along with your journey?
I would say LinkedIn and Instagram, but everywhere I am, my name, Isabella Presnal. There are only 5 Presnals in Finland, so I think it's pretty easy to find us if we're going by
that makes
name,
it easy.
So it's just Isabella Presnal on basically everything. So
great. And then, how can listeners be useful to you?
How can listeners? Well, I would love if there are women listening or anyone really listening that would like to be part of, building a different type of future and, supporting social sustainability. If they, checked out Crush Movement and wanted to join us in May at our Crush event, because, I think that it's a really important movement community event that we are doing at Crush to be able to support women and non-binary people who don't necessarily zag along the same way as everyone else, or that they want to change, whether they are outsiders already and or want people that want to change for the better. I think that is a way that I think people listening could support.
Awesome.
Because I think it's so important that we come together and work together. And when we work together, we're stronger.
Yes.
When we are multiple voices, we are stronger. Everything, we can do anything together. So I think very, very overall, long story short, basically, finding that community, and I would, suggest, finding your community at Crush.
Awesome. Yeah, and I believe Crush is on the 14th of May?
Yes, it's on the 14th of May at the Stock Exchange building in Helsinki.
Great. Awesome. But that's it. But thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to following along with your journey, and I'll definitely be attending Crush. So I'll see you there and at Epicenter.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this week's show. To make sure you don't miss next week's episode, follow us on your favourite podcasting app. Do consider leaving a review, as it helps the podcast tremendously.